Okay. I know we were a little bit late here getting started, and I apologize for that. Well, we got a bit of upheaval here in the Panther-Lair.com studios, so had to kind of change some things up. Hopefully the audio is working. I know there's a little bit of background noise, and I apologize for that. It's not worth me really even explaining to you what is going on here, but it's been one of those weeks that you experience every now and then, and yeah. But it's Wednesday night. It's 8:30. That means we got to do the Panther-Lair Show. And no, we don't have to do the Panther-Lair Show. We get to do the Panther-Lair Show here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Remember, there's always, you can always subscribe to the YouTube channel, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. No, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the YouTube channel. You can always subscribe to that. If you want to make sure you never miss any of our live streams or anything like that, you can subscribe there and get notifications, and you'll always be alerted. You'll always be notified when we go live for a live stream, whether it's a post-game show, whether it's sort of an emergency show as a reaction to news that is breaking, or just our regular weekly show here on Wednesday nights at 8:30. And I was close to canceling this thing. I was close to calling this one off just for extenuating circumstances, because the offices are in a bit of disarray. But it's a Wednesday night. I mean, we have to get together. We have to talk a little Pitt sports, and I know the Penguins are playing in a playoff game tonight, and certainly everyone's keeping an eye on that. I'm keeping an eye on it too as we sort of work here. But there's always Pitt stuff to talk about. I think there's always Pitt things to discuss, even as we move through May. And May is one of those, I don't want to say quiet months, but it is one of the quieter months on the calendar. I mean, January, football-wise, like if we're just talking football-wise, and you could extend it to the rest of the Pitt sports as well. But I mean, January, obviously you have Pitt basketball. And Pitt football recruiting is going on. There are lots of visits and that kind of thing. February, there is a signing day that still happens, although it's not quite as prominent as it once was, but there's still basketball going on. You get into March and April, you've got potentially postseason basketball. At one point, there was postseason basketball in March and April. But you've got spring football also. Of course, once you get past May, you get into June, which is a big football recruiting month. July happens. July is definitely one of the dead months or down months in college sports and Pitt football and Pitt basketball. I mean, there's just not a lot going on for college athletics. But then obviously once you get to August, I mean, you're full bore, full speed heading through the fall and into the winter. Bring us right back around. But May is sort of a quieter month. Basketball, they're having recruiting visits. They're bringing in transfers. They're looking at guys. They're trying to land guys and add to the roster for the coming season. Football is, the coaches are out on the road going to see recruits. It's the evaluation period. And during the evaluation period, assistant coaches can go into high schools. They can do evaluations, hence the term evaluation period. You can do athletic evaluations, watch guys work out, and either in the weight room or with their teams, spring practices, those kinds of things. Or they can do academic evaluations. You get one of each for each kid. And the academic evaluation means you go into the school, you talk to guidance counselors, you talk to teachers, that kind of thing. So you see a lot of new offers go out. And it's certainly been the case over today's May 11th. I mean, every day has seen new offers go out. I think maybe Mother's Day, there was a little bit of a moratorium, but not much. I think there were still offers that went out on Sunday. So it's just, but that's kind of what happens this time of year. There's not a lot going on. We always find things to talk about. We're always going to find things to talk about. I've been working on this week's 3-2-1 column for Panther-Lair.com, and it's going to be another long one. There's plenty of stuff to talk about. I'm excited about some of it. I think some of it will spur some conversation. I look forward to seeing the reactions to a few of these topics. And we'll have stuff every week to talk about here on the Panther-Lair Show and on Saturday mornings on the Panthers Insider Show on the Fan. I mean, we've always got a lot to discuss. But May is one of those sort of quieter months in terms of news. it's sort of one of those things where, there might be commitments, but a lot of times the only news you're going to get now, there's a 50-50 chance that it's going to be bad news. You'll get commitments, you'll land recruits, you'll land transfers, but you also might have guys get in trouble. You might have guys decommit. The transfer window is closed. You're not going to lose any more transfers at this point. I don't know if graduate transfers, if the deadline is a little bit different for them. But regular guys, underclassmen who want to enter the transfer portal had to go in by May 1st. Look, and we put a picture of Jordan Addison up just as I'm saying that. Jordan Addison saga continuing. USC, Texas involved, that he's going down and visiting Texas. I mean, I don't have anything new to say about that. I don't have anything new to say about the Jordan Addison situation. I don't have anything new to say about where he's going to go or what it means for Pitt. We talked about it. We talked about it last week. We talked about where he could go. We talked about what the impact it has on Pitt. We talked about the receiver room that remains. And we can keep talking about that part of it. I'll keep breaking down the receivers that Pitt still has. But, and we'll talk about what Pitt loses with Jordan Addison. But as far as where he's going to go, I'll watch with some interest. I'm not going to have a lot to say about it. Because, the popular narrative now is the change in offense. That Jordan Addison wasn't feeling like the new offense was a good fit for him. That he wasn't developing a chemistry with Kedon Slovis. That he wasn't feeling it with, Taekwon Underwood and Frank Signetti. That, just changing up the coaching staff. It was too much for him. He didn't go for it. He didn't like that they changed the staff and lost the quarterback. Well, everywhere you go, if you leave your school, not only are you going to have a new offensive coordinator, unless he goes to Nebraska, not only are you going to have a new receivers coach, unless he goes to Texas, and not only are you going to have a new quarterback, unless he goes to the Steelers, you're going to have new players at those positions, guys you have not played with before. And you're going to have to develop a new chemistry, and you don't have spring camp to do it. You're going to have to get up to speed all over the summer. Oh, and you're also going to have to learn a new head coach. You're going to have to learn a new academic support system. You're going to have to get new tutors and new this and new that. Life skills, all those other parts of college that are not just your offensive coordinator and your wide receivers coach, you're going to get new of those too. But he didn't feel like it was a fit anymore. So, whatever. It's his decision. I think we've all accepted that that's what Jordan Addison has decided to do. And, like I say, if we want to talk about the guys who are coming back, we can talk about the guys who are coming back. The guys they're going to have and what that receiving core could be. Because, like I said, I think I said it last week. I think this receiving core can be pretty good. I think there's still a lot of talent in this group. I liked this wide receiving core a whole lot. Certainly before Jordan Addison left. But when we talked about it, we talked about how it wasn't just the reigning Biletnikoff Award winner. Now, that having a guy like that increases, your ceiling considerably, having the reigning Biletnikoff Award winner. But the thing was, that group felt it doesn't have tremendous depth, but they have depth. They had more guys beyond Jordan Addison. They had Jared Wayne, and they had Kanate Mumfield, and they had Jaden Bradley and Jalen Barton, two guys who, are maybe a little unproven. Haven't got as many opportunities, but I think they've shown real flashes, and I think the coaches are excited about them as well. And then, they brought in Bub Means from Louisiana Tech. You've got, some of the freshmen. You've got some of the, redshirt freshmen like Miles Alston kicking around. They're guys who can make plays. I don't know if there's another Biletnikoff Award winner on this roster. I don't know if they need one. You'd like to have one, certainly, but I don't know if you need one in order to succeed, because they've also got the offensive line, and they've got the running backs coming back. And this team's success, more than, this team's success is going to be decided not so much by the receivers, but by the quarterback. All right? It's going to be about Kedon Slovis. And what Kedon Slovis does is going to be what determines, how far this team goes. If they win 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, however many games they win, is going to be determined by what the quarterback does. I mean, this is elementary stuff. I mean, it's obvious. And certainly Kedon Slovis' performance will be aided, and enhanced by having a guy like Jordan Addison. But this team will go as far as the quarterback takes them. And I think we can go back and forth guessing about what that might look like and guessing about how he might play and hypothesizing about what he might be able to do. But until we actually see it, we don't really know. I think a lot of people are optimistic about Kedon Slovis, and I think for good reason. I think he showed a lot of promise and potential at USC. I think he made some nice throws in the spring game, and I think obviously they held a lot back, didn't really want to show much of their offense or show much of what their quarterback was capable of. But I think there's reason to be optimistic about him and his performance and what he might be able to do with this team this season. I think the receivers will help him out, but he's going to be the one who has to make them look good, because he's a quarterback. That's what quarterbacks have to do. They have to be the guy. And so this team, all of it, its success is going to come down to him more than any other individual player. He's the most important one. Just like Kenny Pickett was the most important player last year. And that's the reality. For as good as Jordan Addison wasn't, he was great. One of the best, wide receivers in Pitt history. Top 3? Top 3, probably. I mean, we could go down a long. We could go down a rabbit hole with the discussion of who the top receivers are in Pitt history. I mean, there's obviously a number one. He wore number one. But then you start looking beyond him. I mean, Antonio Bryant gets forgotten, but he won a Biletnikoff. Tyler Boyd, I think, is in that conversation. You can get into some of the older guys, but I think Jordan Addison is right there in that mix. And top 3, I would say, with Fitzgerald and whoever else you want to pick to put in there. Boyd, maybe. I would pick. I wouldn't argue with you if you wanted to pick Tyler Boyd, but I digress. Jordan Addison was great. Kenny Pickett was the MVP. That's the reality of it. And this year, Jordan Addison could be great again. If Jordan Addison was still at Pitt, maybe he would have another great season. But Kedon Slovis would need to be the MVP. Kedon Slovis would be the most important player and is the most important player for this team. As I said, I digress. We can talk about that receiving core, and we will talk about that receiving core a lot over the next, what is it, May 11th? So we have less than 4 months. We'll talk about it a lot over the next 3.5 months before the season starts, 2.5 months till training camp begins. Wow. No. Yeah. June, July, and half of May. That'll take us right to the beginning of August in training camp. 2.5 months. Wow. I better do something good with this summer. But anyway, so there's a lot going on. Bringing it back around to what we were talking about, transfers going in, transfers coming out. Actually, not so much transfers going in anymore. As I say, that May 1st deadline, if guys wanted to be able to play in the fall, they needed to be in the transfer portal by then. So you've probably lost all the guys you're going to lose. And now it's just a matter of, I think Pitt has 3 or 4 scholarship spots open, so it's a matter of what they do with those spots. They give them to walk-ons, if they bring in another transfer or two. I could see if they wanted to get another quarterback, particularly one who maybe projects for down the road, a guy who wants to transfer after his freshman year or something like that. I could see if they wanted to get another tight end. Gavin Bartholomew is obviously your number one guy there, but if you wanted to add another tight end to play with, Jake Renda and who else? Kai Wright. I get. That tight end group is a little bit thin. So if you wanted to get another tight end, I could understand that for sure. Linebacker, I think they've largely addressed. I'm not sure they really need another linebacker. If you can get an impact player at like defensive tackle, go for it. You've already got Kalijah Cansey, so I mean, you're going to get a big impact there. But if you wanted to get another real playmaker out of the portal, I think guys like Devin Danielson and Tyler Bentley and David Green are pretty good in their roles, but they're not necessarily productive. And maybe that's not their roles. Maybe that's not what they're being asked to do. Maybe that's not what the Pitt coaches want them to do. But I think if you were to get a guy who could be productive to play next to Cansey, yeah, I think that would be hard to turn that down. So I mean, we'll see. Like I say, they've got 3 or 4 spots to play with. They've got scholarship spaces available that I think they could bring in another transfer. And, I think there are a couple spots that maybe they could fit in. So bringing it all the way back to the beginning of what we were talking about here, about the month of May, that's kind of the news that you're getting this month. And then you're getting things like the ACC meetings and, sort of bigger conference talk and sort of bigger topic issues. And one was about doing away with the divisions, going to a single division format, kind of like what they did in 2020. Everybody, plays through their games, however many conference games they have, 2 teams with the best records. Probably with a series of tiebreakers, end up in the ACC championship game. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Some odds came out from Bet Online. ACC odds. I actually had those pulled up. I wanted to get back to that. Pitt was 3rd behind Clemson and Miami. Clemson's 2-3. Miami's 5-1. Pitt is 9-1. So 2nd in the Coastal and 3rd to win the ACC. Not too much in the way of surprises there. Clemson still gets the Clemson vote. I think they're still going to be the preseason favorite because they're Clemson. And it's going to take more than one down year for Clemson to fall from that, that perch. Miami getting the nod over Pitt. I'm not surprised by that. I think when the media votes in the summer, they're probably going to vote Miami as the favorite in the Coastal. Almost exclusively, well, not exclusively, because they're always going to get extra votes because they're Miami. I mean, people still believe Miami is Miami, even if Miami has shown itself not to be Miami a number of times over the years. But the majority of that, majority of the support for Miami this year is going to be about the quarterback, about Tyler Van Dyke, and him coming back after an outstanding season last year. And so they're going to be the Coastal favorites. I don't think there's any, I don't have any doubt about that. But I expect Pitt to be right behind them, and that seems about right. And it's. In a way, these odds from Bet Online, putting Pitt at 9-1, putting Pitt 3rd best odds to win the ACC. I mean, there's a lot of respect there. There's a lot of respect for Pitt because they lost. And these odds came out 2 days ago. They came out on Monday. So these odds were made with Pitt having lost a Heisman Trophy finalist and a Biletnikoff Award winner. And not to mention changing offensive coordinators, although I don't think that looms quite as large as Pickett and Addison. And so I think there's a lot of respect, actually, for Pitt with those odds. To put them still 3rd to win the conference, ahead of every Atlantic team other than Clemson, ahead of every Coastal team other than Miami, despite losing Kenny Pickett and despite losing Jordan Addison, there's some real respect and some credit being given to the roster that Pitt has coming back, to what Pat Narduzzi has built, to the team for winning the ACC last year. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure Pitt fans find a lot of ways to take disrespect. Pitt fans find a lot of ways to be aggrieved, and I'm sure that something like that caused some of that. Why isn't Pitt the favorite to win the ACC? I mean, given what they lost, just in those 2 guys, I got to say that it seems, like I say, I think there's some respect in there in making Pitt 3rd. And I'll give them credit. If you want to talk about disrespect, Wake Forest is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wake Forest has the 6th best odds to win the ACC, 3rd best in the Atlantic Division. They're 20-1. They returned their quarterback from a team that won the Atlantic and went to the ACC championship game last year. It started off, what did they start off, like 7-0, 8-0? Something like that. They should be a little miffed about not getting more respect. Virginia is another one. They're 8th. They have the 8th best odds to win the ACC. They're behind Miami, Pitt, and Carolina in the Coastal. So 4th best odds out of the Coastal Division teams, 33-1. They bring their quarterback back. They did lose a lot. They lost a lot of personnel this offseason, but it's a team that returns, the most productive quarterback in the conference, to a team that went down to the wire with a chance to win the Coastal Division pretty late in the season last year. They weren't just, they weren't dogs all year. They made a pretty good show of it. I think Virginia can play the respect card, or disrespect card, as it were. I think Wake Forest can play the disrespect card, as it were. Pitt, not so much. I think Pitt's getting properly respected, and maybe even getting a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. with what they lost to still end up as third best odds to win the ACC. So that was a few thoughts on that. I want to get to the chat screen here. Some live, the people in the live stream. Pittsburgh Sports All the Time says, thoughts on the NCAA's new NIL deal rules. I haven't read their rules too closely just yet, what the NCAA has talked about. I can only, I'll have to look into the details. I can only imagine that it involves dealing with, third-party groups that are getting involved and trying to find a way to minimize the impact of third-party groups on the recruiting process, whether it's for high school kids or for transfers, which we talked about last week, is ultimately the only thing the NCAA can really do is try to eliminate that influence from the process. I don't know if they'll be successful or not. And even if they make a rule, people are still going to find ways to get around the rules. But that's really the NCAA's only recourse here. Like I said last week, there's three components: the immediate eligibility, which lets guys play right away; the transfer portal, which lets guys go anywhere they want. They don't have to be released to certain schools; and then NIL deals, which bring cash into the whole equation. And I said, look, you're not going to eliminate any one of those three things. You're not going to take away that one-time free eligibility. You're just not. I think that door has been open and it's not going to be closed. You're not going to make a rule that restricts player movement when you've already taken a step in that direction, which they did with the one-time free eligibility. You're also not going to eliminate the transfer portal, and what it is about the portal is the fact that there's no restrictions on where you go. That you don't need your current school to release you to another school, which, like I said last week, it wasn't that long ago that was the case. It was only a few years ago where you had to get a release. Schools would say, we are not going to release you to any team in the conference or any team on our upcoming schedule or this other team that we don't like. And if you wanted to go to that school, I think you had to pay your way for a year, because you didn't get released from your scholarship. You're not going to make that rule again. You're not going to undo that. And that's ultimately what the transfer portal did and does. That's the impact of the transfer portal, is it makes you available to all schools across the country. You're not going to undo that. And you're not going to take away the name, image, likeness rights. You can try to make rules about how they're executed. You can try to formalize the process. You can try to make it a system within which schools and players and collectives and what have you operate. But you're not going to take away the name, image, likeness rights. So those things are always going to be part of it. If the NCAA is going to do anything, if they're going to address any element, it's third parties and minimizing the impact of the third party groups. So I can only presume that's what they tried to do. I'll have to look into it a little bit more. RJCman38 is a super chatter. We appreciate him. He says NIL needs leadership. That means death penalty for cheaters. There's no death penalty for cheaters. I mean, they're not going to make a death penalty for cheaters. There are times when it's egregious enough, when it's blatant enough, when it's provable enough that they will crack down on a program. But for the most part, honestly, I think some of these schools and entities that are operating in shady ways are doing it. They're wise enough to cover their tracks enough to make it difficult to prove. And second of all, what's the incentive for the NCAA to really, really invest a lot of resources into cracking down on these things? Yeah, I mean, like shady backroom deals, duffel bag full of cash kind of thing. What's the incentive? College sports are a cash cow. NCAA makes a lot of money. These conferences make a lot of money. These schools make a lot of money from the TV deals. Do you really want to take some of your premier programs who maybe aren't doing everything above board or maybe aren't doing everything by the book and hit them with a death penalty? It's not going to happen. No matter what kind of strong leadership you bring in, it's not going to happen. Pittsburgh Sports All the Time says, thoughts on the ACC potentially getting rid of divisions? So, big topic this week about getting rid of the divisions. I don't hate it. I don't think it's the worst idea. It's funny. This has been talked about for a while. People have talked for years about the ACC needs to get rid of the divisions. You need to just take the top two teams. And the premise was always that it's not fair to the Atlantic teams, with the presumption being that, well, the best teams in the conference are always in the Atlantic. And so the top two teams, and I think the assumption was always Clemson and Florida State, it's not fair. Those should be the two teams that are in the ACC championship game. Well, I went back and looked, and since 2013 when the conference expanded, there's only been 2 years where that actually would have happened. There's only been 2 years where if you compared all the records, the top two teams, the two teams in the ACC championship game would have been both out of the Atlantic. In 2013, Duke went to the ACC title game. They won the Coastal at 6-2 in ACC games. Florida State went 8-0 and Clemson went 7-1. So, that year, if it was a one division model, if they didn't have two divisions, Clemson and Florida State would have gone. In 2016, Clemson and Louisville both went 7-1 at the top of the Atlantic. Clemson won the tiebreaker, so they went to the ACC title game and faced Virginia Tech, who went 6-2 in the Coastal. So that was another year where two Atlantic teams would have gone instead of an Atlantic and a Coastal if we didn't have the two divisions. But every other year, obviously 2020 was an exception because they didn't have any divisions that year. Everybody was scheduled to play 10 ACC games, and Clemson and Notre Dame went to the title game. But since the expansion in 2013, there's only been 2 years where the result would have been different if we didn't have two divisions. So I don't think I think there's a fantasy land that some ACC fans live in where they believe that Clemson and Florida State should be in the ACC championship game every year. And if there was only one division and there was no need to put a coastal team in there, that would be the case. It would always be Clemson and Florida State, and everyone would be happy in the conference. But that really hasn't been the case. It hasn't been the case. Like Pitt would have gone if it was one division in 2018. If you didn't have two divisions, Pitt still would have gone to the ACC championship game that year at 6-2. Obviously, last year Pitt and Wake Forest still would have gone to the ACC championship game, whether it was in two divisions or one. So I don't think it's as big of a deal. Now, here's the upside. All right, it's not a competitive thing. The upside of doing away with the divisions is if you can reorganize the schedule format and the schedule matrix. I mean, we all know it stinks right now. Pitt has been in the ACC since 2013. They've played NC State as a conference. Well, I guess they played them in 2020. So bad example. Because they played them in 2017 and 2020. They played Louisville once. All right. They've played Clemson 3 times, but one of those was the 2020 season where things got changed around. Boston College, kind of the same thing. They played 3 times, so this 2020 season got changed around. But we're coming up to the end of a cycle, so you're finally kind of closing the circle here. They're going to play at Louisville this season. They still haven't played at NC State yet, again, even though they've been in the conference for 10 years. If you were to change it up, and the most common model that's being talked about now is that you would have each team has 3 annual opponents. 3 teams that they face every year. And then the other 5 teams on your conference schedule are, if there's you and your 3 annual opponents, that's 4. That leaves 10 teams. And you would rotate through those 10 teams over a 2-year cycle. 5 one year and 5 the next. And the way it would work out is you would see every team at least twice every 4 years, and you would host every team at least once every 4 years, which would be ideal. When you have a conference the size of this one with 14 teams, there are only so many ways you're going to be able to get to see teams often and frequently. And this is one of the best, I think, because it gives you're not going to see every team every year, but you can get to where you're seeing every team every other year. Which is effectively what it would be. You would see every team every other year. Well, beyond the 3 teams that you see every year. And I think that's a good model. And I think if you do away with divisions, that's what you would have an opportunity to do. That's how you could make it work, and that would be the real upside, is just more variety in the schedules, more opportunity to play more teams, more opportunity to travel to different places, more opportunity to see more opponents in the ACC, which would be nice, right? So that, I think, is the upside. Then we get into a conversation about who Pitt should have as their 3 permanent crossover or 3 permanent rival opponents. I'll tell you, so for the 3-2-1 column on Friday, I went through and I predicted what each team's 3 opponents would be. And I'll come back to it if it ends up I'm right about any of them. But I'll tell you Pitt. I'll tell you who I predict for Pitt as 3 annual opponents. One, the first thing I would say, I predict that every team will keep its current permanent crossover opponent. So like Clemson plays Georgia Tech every year. That's Clemson and Georgia Tech are linked up. Georgia Tech from the Coastal, Clemson from the Atlantic. Wake Forest and Duke, Boston College and Virginia Tech, NC State and North Carolina, Louisville and Virginia, Florida State and Miami. Every year, like that's the permanent crossover opponent. Pitt has Syracuse. So I'm predicting that when they go to this 3-team model, this 3-5-5, I guess is what they're calling it, Pitt and Syracuse will keep each other on the same schedule, or on the schedule annually. And then the popular one to say, and I'm with it too, and I hope they would do it, is Virginia Tech. I would like to see Pitt continue to face Virginia Tech every year. I don't know if it's real or perceived, but I think there's some animosity there. I don't think these programs really like each other. They've played some great games over the years. They've had blowouts. They've had close ones. They've had blowouts in both directions. They've had close ones in both directions. And they're sort of somewhat similar as programs, I think. I think there's a lot of reasons for these 2 teams to dislike each other. And I think there's a lot of reasons for these 2 teams to play each other a lot. And then for the third opponent, as I looked at it, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, 2 former Big East teams, even though Virginia Tech goes back to 2003 or 4 or whenever it was. I thought, well, Pitt will get at least one, and each of the, try to make it so the former Big East teams don't just get 3 former Big East teams. So Louisville, I gave them Virginia, Wake Forest, and Florida State. Actually, they didn't get any former Big East teams. Syracuse, I gave Pitt, Boston College, and Clemson. Who else? Miami, I gave Florida State, NC State, and Wake Forest. As far as teams that came over from the Big East. And Pitt, I give Syracuse, Virginia Tech, and then for a traditional ACC team, I give them NC State. And the reason I picked NC State, and I bounced back and forth, I thought about Louisville a lot, I thought about Boston College a lot, and I just, I don't want to see it just be all former Big East teams. And so NC State makes sense to me because I think, if the conference is looking at it, I think there's a real possibility that Pitt NC State happening every year could produce some pretty good games that have an impact on the conference. I think both programs seem to be heading in a positive direction. I think both programs seem to be building right now. And I think if you match them up annually, I think it could be games that really have an impact on the conference. I really do, every year. And so that's the one I went with. I think they, like I said, I wanted to give Pitt at least one traditional ACC opponent. Clemson, I gave Clemson Georgia Tech as their crossover opponent, plus Boston College and Syracuse. I felt like they would give Clemson the easiest path. I think it's common. A lot of people suggested that, Duke, North Carolina, NC State, and Wake Forest will all just play each other. But I don't think the conference will be that obvious about it and just put all the 4 North Carolina teams against each other. I think they'll spread them out a little bit. Duke will, Carolina will still play, NC State and Virginia and Georgia. Well, Carolina will still play NC State. Duke will still play Wake Forest. Let me see if I think I actually kept it to 1 Carolina team for each Carolina team. So Duke, Wake Forest, NC State, North Carolina, and that's it. It's kind of, and you'll see all this in the 3-2-1 column on Friday. But for Pitt, I see Syracuse, Virginia Tech, NC State. I think that could be fun. Let's see here. Talkis Pitt says, I think Pitt will be fine without Addison. Yes, it will hurt, but it's not like we don't have talent and depth. I just wish we would move on for the Addison drama. Yeah, and I think Pitt fans are. I mean, I think Pitt fans are going to, anytime there's news about Jordan Addison, they're going to respond to it and react. I think that's inevitable because he's a star player who was at Pitt and had a great season and broke records and won trophies and helped them win a championship. And now he's leaving. So, I mean, Pitt fans aren't going to ignore Jordan Addison, but I think most of the drama has moved on. That's just my thought. Different fans might feel differently. Coaster King says, what's been the issue with local recruiting lately? It feels like Pitt has serious recruiting momentum everywhere outside of Western PA. So that's a really good question. That's something I'm trying to figure out myself, is why Pitt doesn't seem to have more traction with some of the local guys. I mean, there are local guys that I felt like Pitt was in really good shape with, and that is kind of dissipated. I felt like they were in really good shape with a few local guys last summer, and a year later, it doesn't feel quite as strong. It doesn't feel like they're in quite as good of shape. And the only thing that's changed since then is that they won the ACC, they were a top 15 team, and they won 11 games. So I don't get that. I think there was always a feeling if you start winning, you're gonna then you're really gonna start landing the recruits, and I think Pitt is going to have a really good recruiting class, but I just don't know how much of it is going to be made up with the top guys locally, and it's curious to see. And I think there's a lot of things that go into it. And I talked about this on the message boards a little bit, in similar conversations. There's still, and maybe there will be no matter what Pitt accomplishes, but there's still some, I don't know if I want to call it anti-Pitt sentiment locally. Not necessarily among the recruits, but among people who talk to the recruits, among people who influence the recruits, among people whose opinions might get through to the recruits and maybe even impact the recruits in their decision-making process and their thought process. I think there's a feeling that Pitt is not big-time enough. And, it's one thing when you're talking about a school like Alabama, or Clemson, or Florida. But it's another thing when you're talking about schools that maybe have not had success on the level that those schools have, and to still see influence around the recruits pushing them to somewhere other than Pitt. And maybe, for some, and I mean, we're talking about like adults. We're talking about adults who are around the recruits. And maybe for some of them, it's just old habits die hard, and they've been talking down on Pitt since the days of Paul Chryst going 6-6 every year, or Dave Wanstead's years, or things like that. And I mean, they did go 6-6 4 years in a row, and maybe it stems from that. Maybe it's still lingering for that because this is not new. This has been going on for a while, but for whatever reason, and it's not 100% either. Because we just saw not that long ago, Pitt got Nakai Johnson and Elliott Donald and Dayon Hayes and Dorian Ford. They've gotten some good locals, but they've lost on a whole bunch too. And there's no point in the debate about, well, they don't need locals, they do need locals. Look, guys have left Western PA and gone to other schools and had great success, and guys have left Western PA and gone to other schools and bombed out. It happens. I mean, it happens no matter what area you're coming from and no matter what schools you go to. Guys are going to have varying degrees of success. And so, we can't just look at it and say, boy, every Western PA kid who leaves the area does, bombs and is a bust. And we can't say that every Western PA kid who leaves the area is great and ends up as a first-round draft pick. I think there's a mix of both. But the bigger point is, so I mean, and also, as it relates to building the roster with local kids, no, you can't build an entire roster out of the WPIAL. You can't. And I don't think most people believe that you can. But what it comes down to is when there's top talent locally, and this applies whether you're Pitt, whether you're Texas A&M, whether you're Washington, whether you're Arizona State, whether you're Boston College, whether you're Rutgers, whoever you are, when there's top talent locally, you need to get as much of it as you can. because it's good. It's good to have local star players on your roster. It's good to have locals leading the charge for you. It doesn't always solve everything. We had like 13, 14, 15, 16, about 5 or 6 years in a row of Tyler Boyd and Jordan Whitehead leading the charge for Pitt, and it still didn't really help them get that much traction. But it's better to have those local guys on your roster than not. But for whatever reason, there's a negative sentiment out there. And I think it gets through to these kids, not necessarily saying don't go to Pitt, but kind of saying you're better than that. And it's unfortunate to see. I think some of the, I'd be interested to see what some of these kids would choose if they didn't have that influence. But then, maybe you could say the flip side is 15, 20 years ago, there were, and 25 and 30 years ago, there were influences saying, go to Pitt. This is the big time school for you. And I think probably Pitt fans would prefer that was still the sentiment. But I think there's just been a shift in the influence on these players and these recruits. And the result is that Pitt's not getting as many of them. Now, Pat Narduzzi wants to get them. Pat Narduzzi wants to land the local kids. Pat Narduzzi wants as many 5-star, 4-star local prospects as possible. He wants all the best players in the WPIAL. But he also knows, like I said, you're not going to build your entire roster out of the WPIAL. And he knows that probably some of this sentiment exists. He knows that it's going to be an uphill battle with a fair number of local prospects. And so, when we talk about the coaches being on the road, this is why they're spending weeks in Georgia and weeks in Florida and weeks in New Jersey, and weeks in Virginia. They're all over the place because they have to be. Because they know there's more talent out there and they need to go get that talent. So Narduzzi wishes he would get more of the locals. He's going to keep trying to get more of the locals, but he's also going to work on building his roster with guys from outside of the local area. It's an ongoing situation to watch because there are some good players coming up in the next few classes locally. Let's see here. Michael B. is a super chatter, and we appreciate him for sure. He says, "What's up, Chris? Wanted to donate, but I'm watching the Penguins tonight. Crosby is injured, not good. Anyways, no questions this week. Take care." All right. Appreciate that, Michael, and I appreciate the update on the Penguins game. I don't even have it open right now. But this is a podcast, right? And you'll be listening again later. Maybe some people are listening live. Maybe some people are watching it or listening to the podcast later. So I'm not going to do updates from the hockey game. Let's see here. Talk is Pitt says, "I don't see a rivalry with Virginia Tech. I get along with Virginia Tech fans, most of them." Yeah, I just think when you look at Virginia Tech games against Pitt, even going back to the Big East days, they played some big games. They had some prominent matchups and some pretty considerable, some real bouts, And I think even once they got into the ACC, you can look kind of year by year and find some intriguing storylines with the Virginia Tech games almost every year. Whether 2013, I think it was, Pitt went down there and Tom Savage just got killed. James Conner was hurt. Pitt's O-line couldn't block anyone that year. 2014, Pitt hosted Virginia Tech on a Thursday night. They had the week before they didn't play the previous week, is what I'm trying to say. And they totally revamped their offense. If you recall, they opened the first snap of the game on that Thursday night in the shotgun with Chad Voitek in the shotgun, and he rolls out and starts running. And all of a sudden now they're an offense that does this kind of thing. 2015, Pat Narduzzi's first year, it was a game that went down to the wire and ended up getting closed out on some big defensive plays. 2016 was 36-33 game at Heinz Field. When Panaruzzi said that all the Virginia Tech receivers were pushing off, he ended up getting fined after that game. 2017 was the game down there. Jester Weah tackled at the 1. Kenny Pickett getting a lot of playing time, really kind of taking the starting job in that game. Pitt scored a fake field goal touchdown. All kinds of stuff. And after Jester Weah goes down at the 1, he can't get in. They try 4 times and they can't score a touchdown. 2018 was the game up here, the 52-22 game where Pitt ran for like 500 yards. That's a hard one to forget, and they got it paid back the next year in 2019 when Virginia Tech won 28-0, another beatdown. 2020 is one that probably forget sometimes. That was the game up here, and Pitt had like 9 guys out due to COVID, like 9 or 10 guys out. And I can tell you for a fact before the game, Pitt coaches were hoping the game wouldn't get played. They couldn't understand why the game had not gotten canceled when they were missing so many guys. And then they ended up like crushing Virginia Tech. And then this past year, Pitt went down and just bludgeoned them. So I think those games have some storylines. I think there's some good history there. We'll see with the new coaching staff kind of how it works out and what sort of develops. But I think there's some history there between both programs. And I think it's fun. Those two teams, where they play, when they play, it tends to produce some interesting games, some fun games. Let's see here. Pat O says, Virginia Tech fans are obnoxious. I hate them. I consider them our biggest rival in the ACC. I would too. I mean, if you're going to pick anyone that you would say Pitt's got a historic rivalry with, I know Syracuse is the longest running current rival that they played consecutive games against. But I think if there's anyone that really you have that dislike for, it's got to be Virginia Tech. I think Virginia Tech is the one that it really exists. And the games, it's been a back and forth series. And so I think that helps make it, a more interesting rivalry. They both, they go back and forth. Pittsburgh Sports All the Time says, I think it's fair to say with the contract's extension to the backyard brawl, West Virginia is the number 1 rivalry, along with Virginia Tech as number 2, North Carolina number 3. And as far as teams that Pitt's going to play this year, I would guess so. Yeah. I mean, there isn't that team that you circle on the calendar ahead of time and say, boy, I can't wait until that game. I mean, certainly this year, any of these Virginia or West Virginia years there is. The backyard brawl is certainly one that you're going to circle. But, out of the ACC opponents, I'm not really sure who you circle. You get up for the big game against Clemson. Miami's always going to draw some interest. Carolina, because it's Carolina, although Pitt's won a couple now against Carolina. And then Virginia Tech, like I said, because of sort of the history of those games and what they produce. But anyway, I appreciate you bearing with me tonight through the extra sound and the ambiance of the Panther-Lair.com studios being in disrepair. I apologize for that. Hopefully we'll have things a little bit more back to normal for next week. But in the meantime, if you want to get all the Pitt info and articles and analysis and content and discussion and coverage and all that stuff, Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com is the website. Go check that out. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. We'd love to have you join the conversation on the message boards. Talk about all these kinds of topics and more on the boards at Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Saturday morning, 8 a.m., the Panthers Insider Show is on 93.7 The Fan. You can definitely tune in then to listen to more Pitt sports talk. And then, of course, we do this every Wednesday night, 8:30 till sometimes 9:30, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And, we have some fun. Tonight we probably cut it a few minutes short just because, it's a bit of a challenging situation. But I appreciate everybody who came in for the live stream. It's been fun to chat tonight, take some questions, and try and answer some questions, have a little back and forth. I appreciate that. And, thanks everybody who listens to the podcast later in the week. Make sure you subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And, yeah, then you'll get a notification when we go live again next week. So we'll be back next Wednesday night at 8:30 for another edition of the Panther-Lair Show. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great rest of the night. Have a great rest of the week. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.